Hello and welcome to Cooking the Books with Heather. Today we're going to be making a recipe I would have sworn we'd made before, but apparently we haven't. We've made at least 2 recipes for this before on my channel, but today we're going to be making the deviled eggs out of deep run roots. So, Vivian Howard's cookbook, this is from the eggs section. She has it all sort of divided by ingredient. And I'm actually shocked we hadn't made this before. There's another recipe I found that I was shocked we hadn't made because I would have sworn we did. But anyway, the first thing we need to do for deviled eggs is hard boil some eggs. This recipe is supposed to make 12, but we're boiling 8 eggs because we're going to get rid of all but the prettiest 12. We're not going to use the whites for those. We're going to use the yolks, but not the whites. So it's going to be a lot of yolk, a lot of filling to white, which is good in my opinion. So she says to use this is the hard-boiled egg part is from a different recipe, but she says go ahead and make it as per that recipe. And that says to use a 2-quart saucepan, but you're supposed to cover the eggs by 1 inch. My smaller saucepan did not work for that. So I've got a pretty large, pretty deep saucepan here, and I've got the eggs covered by at least 1 inch. And the next thing we need to do, we're not going to really show you, but it's the method in the book, which I'm going to follow to make sure to see if it works as it should, I guess, is to cover them with the cool water, not hot water, bring it to a boil on the stove, boil it for 1 minute, remove it from the heat, put the lid on, and let it sit for 10 minutes. So that's what we're going to go do right now, and we'll be back when that part's all done to show you the rest. So after 10 minutes of sitting in the previously boiling water with the lid on, I have a little tip for peeling eggs. What I do is I empty out all of the hot water. So I have an empty pan, shake them around real good to get them broken, get the shells started to break, and then fill it up with cold water. I think I usually end up dumping out that water once and refilling it with cold water to cool it off. And that helps sometimes get them peeled well. Mine didn't do too bad this time. Found a little bit of a shell. But we're going to be keeping only the prettiest 8. So I'm not going to get out my pretty platter for this because it's just us today. So the next thing we do, I peeled them already. We're going to slice them in half. She says you can slice them in half the other way, the short way, but I think that's weird. So I'm going to go with the standard way. And you can see that these are well cooked, but there's no gray. So that is exactly what I look for. We're just going to empty all of the yellows, the yolks, into this bowl. I've picked out the 4 I didn't want to use, and I'm just going to put these away for the moment while we make the filling. All right, so to these yolks, we're going to add a few ingredients. I'm going to go with the driest ingredients first, just because I don't want to have to get wet ingredients and then dry ingredients in my things, my measuring spoons. So this is unusual to me, but there's a little bit of granulated sugar. And of course there's salt. And then very little bit of pepper. This is an unusual one for me. This is softened butter. I'm using unsalted. Sorry, I'm using unsalted just because it doesn't say salted or unsalted, but I usually assume unsalted. That's why it was in the refrigerator, so I cut it up small on the plate to kind of let it soften better. Get this stuff out of my way. And then, of course, we have mayonnaise. She says her mother likes Miracle Whip, but she uses Duke's, and that is what I generally have available. So I've got Duke's in here. I have some Kewpie mayo that I don't usually have, which I think it would be an interesting experiment to try that. But anyway, now this also is unusual for me. There's some white wine vinegar. I have nothing super special, but I'm gonna be very careful not to overdo this. There we go. And then some hot sauce. Just a little bit of hot sauce. I'm using Frank's because that's what I have available at the moment. Okay, I have some really, really spicy stuff, but this is what I have available that I like. All right. And that is it. And now, let's see. She says just stir it together with the yolks for right now. So usually I end up getting a fork to try to mash the yolks, but that is not what she says to do here. However, there's another step. There are definitely some pieces that don't want to get mixed up very well right now, but we've got a fix for that, because the next thing we need to do is pass this through a fine mesh sieve. So what I'm going to do is transfer all of this into my sieve. None of it's going to want to come out until I force it through, because that's what it is like. It's super thick. So I'm just going to put it back into this bowl. So she says that this will make it extra fluffy. I would never bother to do this, but she says this makes it fluffier than using a blender or a food processor or mashing it with a fork. So through the sieve we go. All right. Move this out of my way before I create a problem. And then I'm going to use something a little bit stiffer. Get the last bits of yolk. Good enough. So now I'm just going to scrape all that off the bottom. There we go. Give it a little bit more of a stir, because we had a few places where it was mostly just egg yolk. There we go. That's good. Just going in my sink. And now she apparently likes the same method I do, which is to put it into a zip top bag. It's my kitchen. And then she says to pipe this right before you serve it. Just cut off the corner. And then you can squeeze it into the egg whites. And she does say to serve these at room temperature, which in my opinion is when they taste the best. So I also agree with that. Now she says she's a purist and doesn't like adding a bunch of extra stuff to this, but you can, if you like, you know, put some pickles on top or onion or whatever, but we're going to go with, or bacon. Bacon's delicious. We're going to go with just the usual. We're going to sprinkle with some paprika and call it a day. So let me clean up a little bit. Now, because we have taken out 2 whole eggs worth of whites, so we're only going to fill, 8 instead of 12, or 12 halves instead of 16 halves. Yeah, that's right. We should be able to overfill these, fill them generously, let's just say. So I just cut off the tip. And she says if you're just going to put them on a plate, I put down a paper towel just so they won't move around. But if you're going to put them on a plate, you may have to cut a little bit of a little sliver of white off. To make them lay flat if you don't have the pretty deviled egg server, which I do have and just did not want to get out. She does have pictures of using a spoon to fill instead of this, but that seems too fiddly for me. Nicely filled, very tiny from the vinegar. Very last step is to, I have egg all over me, is to sprinkle it with paprika, which is very common if you've ever had these in the South. I'm not measuring it. She does have a measurement, but it is generous. So. This is just plain sweet paprika. Not a lot of flavor, but pretty. We do like smoked paprika, and that would also be good here if you want to add a little bit of a smoked flavor. All right. I'm going to see if I can plate these up a little bit nicer, take some pictures, and then we'll let you know what we think. On this episode of Cooking the Books with Heather, you watched me make deviled eggs from Vivian Howard's Deep Run Roots cookbook, which I couldn't believe I hadn't made before, honestly. But this is a very basic recipe, which you can dress up however you'd like. For me, in particular, it was a little bit tangy. There's quite a bit of vinegar in the mixture, which it's not my favorite. We tend to put like sweet pickles. I don't know if they're bread and butter, whatever. They're a sweet pickle, usually that we get from my husband's mother. So I don't know how to buy those in the grocery store. We just get them, but they're very sweet. But I chop those up and add it to mine. And so ours tend to be a little bit on the sweet and tangy side and not so much on the tangy side as this. So I might try it with like maybe half of the vinegar next time, but I certainly would try it again. It's a great method. I don't think I'm going to be putting my filling through a sieve again, because that's just a little bit too fussy for me. And I think it's fine without that. So the boiling method worked fine. I tend to do mine a little bit differently, just dropping them into the boiling water, because I think they peel a little bit better that way. So I boil the water first and then I put the eggs in. But I do like the boil them for a little bit and then let them sit in the hot water method. It tends to not overcook the eggs. I do hard-boiled eggs for myself for breakfast that way in general, but I do it a little bit differently, but it only works really well for like 2 eggs. If I do any more eggs in the same pan, they end up a little bit underdone for me. But these were perfectly done. And so I think for the number of eggs and everything, it worked out great. So it's a great recipe. It's a great base recipe. If you decide to try it, let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed watching me make this, give me a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and come back and watch me make something else next week.